This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to update and upgrade our Mono Blue partner deck of Sakashima of 1,000 Faces and Eligeth Crossroads Augur. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Up and Up series. Today, it's our Mono Blue partner deck. And for any members, long-term members of the MTGBC out there, you should remember this build. You chose it, and we built it. Remember, Sakashima and Eligeth won the Tournament of Partners many moons ago. And once they won that tournament, it was up to the MTGBC to help create this deck, to which I have kept in the Commander coffers ever since. Yes, there have been some dramatic changes over the course of this deck's life, but the two commanders remain, and today, 4 new cards are going into the 98, which means 4 cards are coming out. So, before we get started, if you want to familiarize yourself a little bit with the history of this build, you can look in the description below where you'll find this build's deck tech, the up to the second deck list, and the oh-so-famous video primer series. Alright, Sakashima and Eligeth, 4 cards in, 4 cards out. Mono Blue, let's go. Our first card of the video, it is Mystical Tutor. How did we go so many videos, so many Up and Up series appearances before realizing that, hey, maybe we should put a Mystical Tutor in a Mono Blue deck? Well, here we are after all this time. 1 Mystical Tutor. Instant speed, 1 blue mana. We search our library for an instant or sorcery card. We reveal it, we shuffle our library, and we put that card on top of it. So, after all this time, Mystical Tutor is finally making its appearance in the 98 of this deck. Of course, it has to knock something out of the 99 in order to be in there, and that card is Maze Mind Tome. Okay, so here we had an artifact for 2 generic mana. We would tap this to put a page counter on this artifact, and then we would scry 1. Then we could pay 2 generic mana and tap it to put a page counter on it, and then we draw a card. When there were 4 or more page counters on this, we would exile it, and then if we did, we drew 4 cards. So what we got is, over a series of several turns, we had the ability to tap this to scry, and put a counter on it to scry, which, of course, if we have Eligeth on our side of the battlefield, we draw a card instead. So this helps to provide a somewhat steady stream of cards over a series of turns. We didn't get to use it throughout the entire game, however. I mean, we can't do the same thing with Mystical Tutor either. Although, in this current iteration of this build, the Mystical Tutor card, which is most likely going to be a form of protection in the, as a counter magic spell, it's going to help us to combo out when we start drawing card after card after card when we have Eligeth on our side of the battlefield, in addition to some other cards that were included into the 98 in past Up and Up episodes. So basically what's happening here is Maze Mind Tome is becoming a little too slow for what this deck wants to do. And if we need to get rid of a somewhat steady stream of cards over a few turns for the quick, decisive, let's search our library for a much-needed instant or sorcery card to help us out right now, well, Maze Mind Tome is going to have to yield for the much quicker and versatile Mystical Tutor. All right, folks, card number 2. If you have been following along with this deck throughout its existence, you can definitely tell that it's trending towards an ultimate mono blue control, which, I mean, let's face it, how many different things are we going to do outside of tribal with a blue deck? Well, that's where we're headed here. And card number 2 going into this build, that is Flare of Denial. Here we have an instant for 1 and 2 blue mana. We may sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. We do have those in this build, that is for sure. So the ability to cast this spell without paying mana for it is very It's very, very possible. And what does this do? It straight counters target spell. So as long as we have a creature on our side of the battlefield and this in our hand, know that as long as the creature is blue and non-token, know that we have one of those quote-unquote free counter spells that we can use to protect whatever it is that we're comboing off to win the game, making so many more friends at the EDH table. With Flare of Denial going in as a very, very powerful counterspell, a somewhat less powerful counterspell must come out in its place. We're not running a deck with 25 counterspells. No. So with Flare of Denial coming in, Thwart is coming out. Thwart was one of those quote-unquote free counterspells that we could cast by returning 3 islands we controlled to our hand instead of paying the 2 and 2 blue of the spell. And what it did is it just countered a target spell. So instead of returning 3 islands to our hand, not somewhat, but definitely setting us back in the mana development department, let's just sacrifice one of those non-blue token creatures instead to get the exact same effect while leaving our islands right where they should be, untapped and on our side of the battlefield. All right, we've reached the halfway point of the cards we're adding into this build. Card number 3. Well, folks, it's a biggin. That's all I can say is in this swap, we're replacing one biggin for another. And, well, I'll let you let me know what that's like in the comment section below. Going into the 98, it's Emrakul, the World Anew. Here we have a 12/12 Eldrazi, the latest iteration of Emrakul, of course, and that's for 12 generic mana. When we cast this spell, we gain control of all creatures target player controls. This iteration of Emrakul has flying, protection from spells, and from permanents that were cast this turn. So that's also going to give us another layer of protection to make sure that if we invest the mana in getting Emrakul into play, or if we get her into play by other means, that she's going to be there for quite a while. So when Emrakul, the World Anew, leaves the battlefield, we then sacrifice all creatures we control. So we ourselves won't have many of our own creatures to sacrifice, but we should have plenty of our opponents to sacrifice, because this is not a creature deck, although we do have some creatures that trigger to make creature tokens based on the spells that we sling. Mostly, those creatures that potentially will be sacrificed will come from one of our opponent's sides of the battlefield. Emrakul and the layers of protection should allow us to turn her sideways numerous times throughout the game, dealing 12 points of damage minimally each time we do so. So with one biggin Emrakul going in, one biggin has to come out, and that is Ulamog, Ceaseless Hunger. I'm sorry, the Infinite Gyre. The Infinite Gyre. So here we have a 10/10 for 10 mana, Annihilator 4, which means that whenever we tip this bad boy into combat, defending player sacrifices 4 permanents. It is indestructible, and when we cast this version of Ulamog, we destroy target permanent. And of course, there is the shuffle effect for when it goes into our graveyard. We shuffle it in our library. We shuffle it in our graveyard into our library. So, this version of Ulamog, I'm not saying that this is a weak version by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that even though the 10/10 indestructible is nice for destroy effects, it does nothing to stop a path. It does nothing to stop a swords. Emrakul does. The Annihilator 4, that is nice when I'm going up against a Spellslinger deck, but not so much when those spells that are being slung are a simple exile target creature. And to invest the 10 mana to see it just get popped like that, oh, it hurts the hearts of the blue mages everywhere out there in the MTG world. But with Emrakul, that's not going to be a problem because protection from spells. So just keep that in mind. The 12/12 flying is a lot more evasive than the 10/10 walker, particularly because Ulamog could just get chump blocked by tokens, which a lot of those spell slinging decks that I play with seem to have in abundance. Yeah, the Annihilator 4 is nice, but with every single time they're just 4 more token creatures, I'm not really breaking through for the damage that I want to. So in my mind, with Emrakul's evasion, it being 12/12, it having a higher form of protection, and taking all creatures from one opponent's side of the battlefield, all of those features stacked up against what Ulamog does, Emrakul is just a better fit here for what we want. And that's not me saying that Ulamog is weak, by no means. That's just me saying that this version of Emrakul is better. And that brings us to our last card of this video, card number 4 going into the 98. And it is a surprised edition, I'm sure. Here we have 20-toed Toad, a 3/3 frog wizard for 3 and 1 blue mana. We have no maximum. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I'm leading everyone down the wrong path. Our maximum hand size is 20. That's going to be beautiful in a deck that wants to draw as many cards as possible every single turn. And whenever we attack with 2 or more creatures, which might be a little sticky if we don't have some of those tokens out there, we put a +1/+1 counter on 20-toed Toad and we draw a card. However, whenever 20-toed Toad attacks, we win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it and we have 20 or more cards in hand. So getting the 20 cards in hand should not be a problem at all. Getting the 20 counters, that might be a bit of a challenge because we have to attack with 2 or more creatures just to put one +1/+1 counter on 20-toed Toad. So it's getting 20 counters, it's going to take some time to do that. The 20 card maximum hand size, that's the reason why we've got 20-toed Toad here in this build. Also, I mean, getting to draw the card is nice too. All we have to do is to attack with this Toad and one other creature, and we are going to get to draw a card. So 20-toed Toad has a little bit of work to do in order for us to quote-unquote win the game, but definitely not impossible if we get this card out in the early game and we're playing for the long game. Because remember, in a mono blue control, it's most likely going to be a long game. If we get this card onto our side of the battlefield early enough and we protect it, well, we have the potential of win condition of getting 20 +1/+1 counters through 20 attack phases. I don't know, folks. Stranger things can happen. I'd like to give 20-toed Toad a try. Let's see what happens. With that card going into the 98, it's going to replace Talrand. So here we had one of the creatures that were included in this build that create creature tokens based on us slinging a spell. Now we just have one less of them. Talrand would make 2/2 Drakes with flying whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, and it's going to yield to 20-toed Toad just to see if we can get some more card advantage just by the ability to attack with it. I don't necessarily think we'll ever be able to win the game with the 20 +1/+1 counters, but hey, you never know. It's Commander. Stranger things have happened. All right, there we have it, MTG BC. 4 new cards going into the 98 of our mono blue partner deck. You let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.